So what about that 13-year-old African boy that doesn't know that 80% of their artifacts, of their history, is in your museums?
Yeah.
What about the African boy, right?
We now have a generation that believes everything we did by colonising. Yes, it is true. To think everything about colonisation was wrong. It wasn't. There were some terrible things, and there were some good things to come out of it. And that is about properly acknowledging your past.
Education.
Yes, completely.
Sanitation.
Transportation.
Yeah. There was so much that we brought to communities. But
Education, sanitation, transport. These are the things that the British feel we probably will be faring much worse if they were not involved here through colonialism. Governor, what do you think of it?
That's basically just hogwash. I don't even know where to start. There's so much. There's no way that colonialism was beneficial to Africa. Everywhere there was an European flag on the continent, we saw a regression, not a progression. Where do I begin? I know she went on 3 things, but I could just start with Belgium. Yeah, in the Congo, we saw about 10 million people, almost half the population at the time. They were massacred, and they had these crazy quarters during King Leopold II, where if you don't produce as much rubber as you're required, you have your limbs chopped off. Portugal, they had this Chilomba thing where people were being rounded up and being sold to South Africa, apartheid South Africa. We have France, Algeria, the Algerian War. About 1.5 million Algerians lost their lives. They were killed fighting for their liberation. We have the Malagasy War, I think in 1949. About 50,000 to 80,000 Malagasy were killed by the French. And I haven't even gone into the Saharan nuclear tests, where up to today the Tuareg lands are still, affected by the radiation. Which other country? Italy. We have the wars in Libya from 1920 to about 1940. Historians say that about half of the Libyan population was massacred because of the concentration camps they had in the desert. And I haven't even gone into the Addis Ababa, issue, but I won't go into it today. Which other country? The Dutch. The Dutch in Southern Africa, we had the Cape Colony. About 30,000 to 50,000 Africans were concentrated in these things they called Bantustans. It wasn't because they loved them so much that they gave them their own space. No, it was segregation. They did that so that they can be able to have them there die out of diseases. And I think by the 1800s, the Dutch went into South Africa in 1650. By 1800s, about 30,000 South Africans, enslaved South Africans, had been ferried away from South Africa. Let's go to Britain. Here in Kenya, about 1 million to 1.5 million Kikuyus went through a most horrible time because of their I don't want to call them the Mau Mau concentration camps, but just concentration camps where people were tortured, had their
testicles.
Their testicles, yes, that's a better word than what I was thinking. They had their testicles, squeezed. I wonder why the Brits were really, really interested in that. It's something about the next generation, so they didn't want a multiplication of Africans, so that they keep their numbers low.
And it was humiliation.
And it was humiliation.
They sodomized men, they raped women.
Damn.
These all happened within our parents' lifetime.
Yeah.
But yeah,
that is insane. Let's go to the next one. Germany, the Herero and Nama massacre. The Herero were massacred. I think about 80% of the population in Namibia were made up of the Herero. About 40,000 to 80,000 of them were killed. 10,000 to 20,000 Nama people were also killed. So the Germans were not there to hand off benefits to them. Let's not forget about the Maji Maji rebellion in Tanzania.
Before you get to Tanzania, I think Namibia is a very important point, because when it happened to Europeans, it was never forget and never again.
Mm-hmm.
most of the world's population don't even know that it happened to Africans first.
Yeah.
And this was the precursor to what they would do between 1939 and 1945. They used the same techniques that they would then go on to perfect. They never offered an apology or reparations until way after. And the reparations that they did offer, the Germans decided how the Namibians would spend it.
Yeah.
Well, when it came to what happened against the Jews in the Second World War, reparations were offered immediately. So, it also talks about how when things happen to us, our lives are not valued, nor remembered, nor mourned. But anyway, carry on. Tanzania.
Yeah, Tanzania, the Maji rebellion. But those are facts. 30,000 to 50,000 people were killed in the Maji rebellion. These were Africans who were trying to fight for their independence, for their liberation. And there was this infamous famine or scorched earth famine tactic that the Germans used in Tanzania as well. More than 50,000 Tanzanians were killed because of that. So out of all these people who were at that round table in the Berlin conference, none of them contributed anything that was beneficial to the African people, to the African land. They were all about extracting benefits from it and putting us down and suppressing any good thing that was happening before. And it's just ludicrous that this lady can say today that, let's think about the benefits that came from it. Yeah. It's just laughable.
Yeah.
Thank you, Gavela. Sonari, what do you make of her remarks?
I think I'll just add to what they said, which is the continuous, it's not even what happened to us before, it's the continuous othering of African bodies, right? So the same way during colonial times or enslavement, when the brutality was exerted on us, we're subhuman. Which is the same way she still views us now, as much as people want to say that we've moved, we're in different times, and racism we're dealing with it. It's still very much present in biases and how people view us, right? Because like Ahmed said, you wouldn't say the same about the Jewish people when the Holocaust happened. No one will say, well, let's look at the benefits of what they had when they were under Nazi Germany. Everyone will just say that was...
You got an Israeli state.
Yeah, you got it, right?
Yeah.
So it's like nobody would say that, but then for us it's a thing. But then it also talks about their it shows the education systems as well, because as much as she's talking about education here, talking about they brought education to us, if you were actually educated, you wouldn't need to repeat these facts.
Yeah.
She would know them. So you're not actually educated.
Yeah. That's true.
Right? And that's how the system is built like that. The European standard of education is not built to actually tell the truth about what's actually happened.
Yeah.
During colonialism, they obliterated, they erased a lot to make sure that a lot was left, and to also justify that we're here civilizing these people who don't have anything, and that's why they erased everything. And it's the same thing happening now. The education system is still the same. You're not really being taught what's truly happening. But even if it was being taught, because I don't think it's stuff she, as a journalist, does not have access to. She has access to it, but it's still the mental perception or psychological perception of how we are perceived.
Definitely.
Very interesting.
And it's not surprising. I think there was a poll that said 43% of Brits are proud of the empire. Another poll that happened in 2020 said of all of the European countries that used to be former colonial powers, Brits are the one that reminisce and wish they still had an empire the most.
Man.
So she's not an anomaly. She is very much part of a very large proportion of the society that thinks the empire was a great thing, and that these countries would be in a better place if they were still colonized. Former British Prime Minister Boris Johnson said the problem with Africa isn't that Britain was there, it's that Britain left. Yeah? So this is a common perception and something that we have to push back against.
Yeah.
Because, this is also what leads to neo-colonialism. We're not just talking about the past as a passive page in a history book. This is active. People still have their colonial tentacles around our economies to this day. We were talking off air, 2 out of the 5 biggest tea exporting companies are British owned. Tea is one of the largest things exported from Kenya. Yeah. This is 60 years after colonialism. When it comes to flowers, what I found online is there's meant to be heavy British involvement but there's a lot of secrecy on who owns what and where these companies. So I would assume it'd be the same things when it comes to flower exports. We know that flowers, the main destination is the UK.
Yeah.
So there's still a neo-colonial relationship between the former colonial powers. And so therefore, they can't be honest about it, because then people start to question why are these guys still active in our countries today if this is what they did in the past. And so that's why there has to be this collective amnesia amongst the British people. That's why a British A-level student won't learn one line of British colonialism while studying history, because they deliberately have to keep these things away from the population.
Yeah. Insane.
Yeah, I think for me, just two things. First of all is that when the Brits or when the Europeans first came to Africa, their argument was, we are going to civilize the place, you know. But they forget, take education for example. She says, you know, we brought education to you guys. Where would you be if you didn't have access to British education? But then we have systems like apprenticeship, which we had, where if you're an ironsmith, you're probably gonna take someone younger than you and you're gonna train them in the craft. What is that if not education? We've seen the works of iron, works of steel in places like Benin, where they still hold the Benin bronze statues. Do they think that those statues magically fell from the sky? Obviously, there has been generations upon generations of both gaining knowledge and passing that knowledge down. And then, here's the thing, whatever positive thing comes out of colonialism in any form, I think there's the opportunity cost to it. And say, for example, the healthcare, right? When they came and implanted their form of healthcare onto us, we automatically, again, due to the systemic subjugation of indigenous knowledge, communities in Uganda used to do C-sections before the white man came here. My community used to do brain surgeries way before the colonialists came here.
Tell them what your community is.
From the Kisii region in Western Kenya. We used to do head surgeries, neurosurgery, basically, for years upon years upon years before the first white man ever came to Africa. But these forms of knowledge are now lost because of one reason and one reason only. The Europeans came to Kenya or came to Africa.
Yeah.
On education, let's talk about the Moors, because the education system was largely contributed by Africans going to Europe, occupying Europe for 800 years. The number 0 came from the Moors' rule over Spain. Algebra, understanding true north, a compass. So the idea that they gave us education makes no sense. Sanitation, when Europeans used to make contact with Africans before colonization, Africans would have to hold their nose because the European smells. This is not me trying to diss. It's just being historically accurate to the record. Europeans would bathe on a monthly basis, and that would be the feudal lords and the kings. The average people didn't have, you know, a routine of washing, of cleaning. The Moors bought underarm deodorant. The first aeroplane that took off came from that period. So the idea that you gave us, and let me just make this clear. I still think Moors taking over Spain and parts of Portugal was wrong. We don't have to take over people's land, subjugate them for us to exchange ideas. I was born in the UK. You're born in Kenya. We've exchanged knowledge without me subjugating you, without me oppressing you, without me stealing your things. This is a European invention, that the only way you can exchange ideas is if we colonize you, we take all your minerals, we take all of your items and export. That's the only way that you can benefit anything from our knowledge. It's a nonsense.
Just, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry if I may. You know, even if we look at, we're not using the yardstick to judge the education because we were educated before. But even if we do, still they don't pass the mark because the average African country had about 20% literacy rates by their standards. By the time 1968 to 1980 came along, Nigeria was about 17%, Kenya was about 19%, and in the DRC, which had almost 100 years, if I'm not wrong, of Leopold plus the Belgian government, only 16 graduates in 1960.
In the whole of DRC.
In the whole of DRC, the population of about 10, 15 million, maybe 20 million, only 16.
Yes.
Yet they say they educated and they provided literacy to them. The only thing that they wanted is to have secretaries and clerks.
Yes.
Anyone who wanted, as an African, to do STEM subjects, math, science, any technical subject, were told, forget it. So there was a discrimination even there.
Yes.
So all these subjects which were technical were reserved for the white people.
Definitely.
So they didn't educate us.
And when they did, it was
to work for
targeted.
them.
So our sister Sana is half Sudanese, half South Sudanese. In Sudan, in 1948, there were 20,000 boys in education. You know how many there were in South Sudan? Around 5,000. Because they were grooming these Sudanese from the north to be their administrators, to run the colonial administration. They were grooming the people from the south to basically do the menial tasks and disenfranchise. And let's not even get into the divide and rule. People from the north weren't allowed to travel south. People from the south weren't allowed to travel north. Arabic was the language of instruction in the north. English was the language of instruction in the south. They laid the foundations for the two republics. From this sister, and now coming from two countries instead of one. Yeah, and this has happened time and time again. We've seen a similar policy in Nigeria. We see similar divide and rule policies here in Kenya. So what they left us with is a divided nation where most of the educated class try to travel to their nations to be doctors and nurses in their hospitals. Even our presidents don't even take, surgery in the countries which they're the leader of. They go abroad. These are the legacies of colonialism.
Yeah.
So which part of that should we be grateful for? I'm confused.
And I think even if, let's say, devil's advocate, they did all this. You gave us education, you gave us transportation, sanitation, all of these things, you gave them to us. But then you killed millions along the way to bring this. I think the most decent human thing to say is just, you know what? You didn't want that, I shouldn't have brought it to you. It's like me coming to you right now and taking your hat and saying, no, you shouldn't wear your hat like that. Wear it the other way around. And I feel so entitled to tell you how to wear your hat. Nobody asked you. So it's not like you can walk in, in like Oxford Street right now, walk through Oxford Street and walk up to a man in a suit and tell him, hey, listen, your tie is not right. I need to fix this for you. And force your way to fix them. They'll say, no, leave me alone. Whether it's wrong or not, leave it as it is.
Yeah.
But for whatever reason, you think you have the right to free will as a white person. However, everybody else does not have that right to free will unless you grant it to them. It's this whole, the white supremacy is so deeply embedded in that you can't even see the cognitive dissonance in things you preach, right? Because right now, women in the UK or the US will say, hey, my body, my rights. So your body is your rights as a white woman in Britain. However, the bodies of black women in Africa were not theirs. They didn't have that agency, but you deserve that agency. So tomorrow she'll do a story, supporting women's rights and supporting all these things.
We'll take the South African woman, we'll put her in a jungle, we'll have people point at her backside. We'll take Otta Benga, we'll put him in a zoo in New York, and we'll put him in a zoo next to the monkeys. Like the dehumanization that was needed to justify colonialism is something that we're still living with the effects of to this day. Had no colonization is good, but had they have done it, say how the Romans did it, Romans went somewhere, we said, we're bigger, we're stronger, we've got more arms, we're going to take you over. It would have been bad, but it wouldn't have been as bad as the way the Europeans did it. The Europeans went over there and said, these are barbarians, we need to save them, we need to give them our religion, we need to make them speak our language, we need to put them in our schools, because these people are they need to be saved from the satanic, barbaric rituals that they practice. So to this day, even in Africa, indigenous spirituality is looked down by Africans. That's the legacy of colonialism.
Black magic.
That's the legacy of colonialism that we're still living with. But anyway, let's play more of the video before we can, because we'll be talking all day.
We brought to communities, but that is. But
But you see, you're typical of what we're talking about.
No, I'm saying that colonization, the empire was wrong. It was wrong, full stop. That's, you know, the things that Britain might have done.
But that's very much
do not
through your modern
compensate for
sensibility,
it.
you might say that, because we wouldn't now routinely go into other countries.
It was a profoundly racist set of basically invasions of other people, where we subjugated people to our rule and sort of made them work for us. It was
Put yourself in the shoes.
their country's work.
Could imagine yourself in the shoes of a 13-year-old boy hearing you say that.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. What?
Yeah, I think we maybe should start from that point.
Yeah, I mean, you wouldn't say that to a German. You wouldn't say, don't teach a 13-year-old German about what the Nazis did,
history of Germany.
because it might affect his self-esteem. It's a nonsense. The history is the history. What they're actually promoting is something that they criticize: wokeism. Wokeism is you know, from their perspective, is that, you know, we should hide this program because it might offend somebody. We shouldn't use this word because it might offend someone. Well, they're offended by history. They're offended by history.
Their own issue.
Yeah.
They're offended by history.
I think there's something she also said there, which is that the gentleman is saying this because in his modernized sensibility now. So inadvertently, you were saying you were not modernized. You were uncivilized when you did what you did. However, you still think it was a good thing. You won't say it was a wrong thing.
Yeah. I think it's also the argument that usually it was a crime of its day, like, you know, slavery. Well, if you're back then, you know, you probably would have owned slaves. But then if you see examples of people like John Brown, himself a white man, who was actually killed in the line of fighting for the abolition of slavery, then it just rubbishes the whole argument. Wrong is wrong. Doesn't matter if it happened 1600 years ago. I mean, in the 1600s, if you owned a slave back then, it was still wrong by those standards. The fact that many people are doing it doesn't really negate the negativity of it. Governor.
And you see, what John Brown did is he rose above his privilege, right? Because there's some people who, it's a bit controversial, but some people elevate John Brown to say that he saved the movement. Yeah, but he was a soldier in the movement, and he joined other Africans to fight for the liberation, but he didn't save it. Otherwise, I would look at him as a role model for these 13-year-old Brits that they're saying. Exactly.
Although he wasn't British, but I get your point.
Oh, he wasn't. Yeah. Despite their privilege, rise above it, see the injustices that have been done, because accountability and looking at history are two things. You just need to be accountable and say, okay, I'm white, I'm privileged, this is where I am, this is our history, but it would be now more patriotic for him in British sense to now right those wrongs by rising above their privilege and now fixing the wrongs.
And that 13-year-old boy might have a Ghanaian classmate, a Nigerian classmate. So when he looks up some of these African countries and goes, why are they poorer than the UK, France, Netherlands? Without understanding the history, he might think we're just biologically inferior. We're just more stupid. Do you know what I'm saying? If you don't explain his history, that's the conclusion that you will lead to. These countries are poor because their people over there are dumber than us. But when you explain the history and you break it down and say, no, they're poorer because we went there, we took all of their things, we installed neo-colonial puppet regimes, we took out revolutionary leaders that tried to advance the interests of their people. That's why they're poorer today, son. You know, that's a better that's a better conversation. Something that the woman in the background did a little ad lib. She goes, and we made it work. So even though it's outside of Africa, there's no greater example of how what she said is incorrect than India. When Britain first arrived in India, India was one of the richest countries in the world, accounting for around 23% of world's GDP. By the time they left, it was 4%. When India first made contact with Britain, there were 23% of the Indian population living in extreme poverty. By the time Britain left, it was 50%. They managed to reduce life expectancy to 21.9 years. There's estimated around 45 trillion was looted. The word loot itself actually comes from the Hindi word. So they didn't only steal their resources, they stole their words. They were looting. They must have heard someone say, oh, you guys are looting. I like that word. We'll now make it part of the English language. So how in any shape or form did India benefit from British colonialism? How in any way, shape or form did Sudan benefit? Did Kenya benefit? If it's so obvious, just give us a few examples. The things that they always say is transport. You can talk about this, Eric, better than me. But the train lines were there to take the loot, the Hindi word, out of the country.
Yeah.
It wasn't for Kenyans to interact with other Kenyans. They didn't do a survey and say, in Nairobi, is there any place you want to travel to? We'll build a train line. We'll get you there in no time. But anyway, you could talk about that
Most
a bit more.
definitely. If I could just touch on an interesting fact I saw about India, that they have been paying, or they paid for the debt to construct the railway up to 1973.
Yeah.
That's when they finished it.
Yes, it was paid by British, Indian taxpayers,
Yeah.
Kenyan taxpayers. So they didn't even pay.
They didn't pay for it.
Railways from
Yes,
one point.
which is even worse.
Yeah.
And they didn't build it either.
Yeah,
Because
and they
it
didn't
was-
build
it was
it.
built.
And they didn't build it. Yeah.
So every aspect you look at it is just lies. Just depends how deep you go. Yeah. But with regards to transport, if I could use the Kenyan example, about 30,000 Indians and Kenyans, Kenyans were used to construct the Kenya-Uganda Railway, which was finished in 1901. 2,500 of them were killed during that process. We have the famous or infamous Tsavo, the man-eating lions of Tsavo. And of course, building railways, just like building a building, it's dangerous stuff. A heavy load might fall on you. You know, it's not something which you can do without adequate equipment and stuff. And back then, of course, these were not just indentured servants for the Indians, but for Africans, it was forced labor, right? So they were not constructing these trains or these railways to connect us. It was all about exporting the raw materials, which is from the plantations, from the mines, and importing, things from their side that they're going to be using to subjugate us even more. And by 1960, I was looking at this crazy fact. Up to by 1960, I think only 10% of Kenyans were living close to a tarmac or a railroad. Just to show that they were obviously avoiding places where there are human settlements, so that you don't get to benefit from the railway passing through there.
Yep.
So it's just about extraction. And I saw this interesting fact, about the Lobito corridor and the rail, and it's something which has been shouted and praised by the Americans, that we're doing this thing, and our investments in Africa, we are now fighting back against China's surge in investments in Africa. However, when you look at it, the route which they use goes like 3,000 miles away from settlements to avoid populations from benefiting from this infrastructure, so that it maintains just about extraction. So what they're doing now is what they did then. What they did then is just about extracting things. So these transportation things which they say we benefited, it was never about us. It was always about them. And the fare that people paid, the Africans paid, was much more expensive just to travel as a person than faring a whole trolley of cocoa, for example. So that just even makes it worse.
After building it with your forced labor.
Exactly. With your forced labor and your taxes, and lying to you that this is something that they left for you. So it's just bad everywhere you cut it.
And this brings it to modern day with what's going on in Burkina Faso and Ibrahim Traore. There was a statistic that there's only been around 5,000 kilometers of paved road since independence. Captain Ibrahim Traore has promised to build 3.5 thousand kilometers of paved road every year. So it goes to show, what a leader that cares about the people and is doing actions for the interest of the people will do, in comparison to a colonial power like France will do, who primary focus is the extraction and looting of wealth.
We appreciate you for staying locked in. Make sure you turn on your notifications so that you'll never miss a beat. Like, share, and subscribe.
Yeah, and also on the AES point, another glaring example is Niger. Niger has been providing France with uranium for I don't know how many decades. It powers like 25, maybe more % of what the EU gets its electricity.
The Eiffel Tower, the lights on the Eiffel Tower come from Niger.
The people of Niger, only 25% of them have electricity. So they have the minerals right beneath their feet, but these minerals go on to power Europe, leaving them in the dark. It just doesn't make sense. And yet another really negative example based on Kenya. Corruption takes like 30 something % of our budget, which is really big. Working without 30% of whatever we plan for, it's a massive hole. And I argue this corruption thingy has its roots again to issues like tribalism, which the Brits had a they played the hand. Basically, during the colonial era, if you had like an estate, what the British used to kind of divide the Africans was that if you are from the Maasai community, they say you're very good at guarding the gate, so the Maasais were known for guarding the gate. Even today, if someone says Mongena Maasai, usually they mean, have you spoken to the watchman? So that's the connotation that came out of British involvement here. And kind of to show the divide and conquer, we had this hierarchy. Of course, we had house Negroes and we had field Negroes. As a field Negro, of course, looking inside, it was much easier work, maybe do the dishes, 1-2 things, clean the house. It's not as hard as going to the farm for like 4 hours. So you had these people who wanted to like get into the house and not into the fields. So in the process, you have communities that resent each other. You see, maybe the Luyas are the ones who are getting the house chores. We are the ones in the field. We also would like to be the ones, working in the house and not in the fields. It's the good old Malcolm X quote about house Negroes and field Negroes. I forget how exactly it goes.
Yeah, if I may. So, let's look at what has been happening before independence and how things changed immediately after. After now we gained sovereignty and, African leaders got into power and, the ones who are not puppets.
Even the puppets, to give them credit, there's been more development under puppet regimes than there has been in the colonial governance.
Yeah. And that just goes to show how bad it is. If the puppets can do more than what the colonial government did, it's just insane.
Yeah.
So in Ghana, when Nkrumah took over, 1957, right, the life expectancy was about 30 years. And this was from 1920 to 1957. 30 years. After he took over, now he was in charge of their health, in charge of their education, now not what they were saying, in charge of everything that they were doing by themselves now. It shot up by 1980 to about 58 years, and today it's about 61 years. So it just shows when Africans took control of their own destiny, how different it was from the colonial regime. Yeah.
And we have here in Kenya, he was at the bit all the roads, Kibaki.
Yes.
He built so much of the roads, so much of the infrastructure. So there's this ridiculous clip where someone says, I've been to Kenya, and you could see all the development and where to thank for that. But they have absolutely no idea who built what.
Yeah.
You get off at Jomo Kenyatta Airport, you'll get on the Chinese Expressway. Then you'll get off the Chinese Expressway, you'll get on one of these roads that was built by the Kibaki administration.
Yeah.
There's very little things that you can point to. Maybe you guys can point us in the right direction. What was built by the British from the period of Kenya becoming a protectorate to 1960, what year did you guys get your independence? 63. What can we point to? Point us in the right direction, somebody.
Just Karen, Naivasha.
Yeah.
If you could talk about that, William.
Yeah, I mean, as the point Eric mentioned, how close were Africans to like tarmac roads or railways at the time of independence? That tells you the whole story. Whatever infrastructure was built there wasn't built to connect Africans to each other. It was built to enable the extraction of resources. Remember, Kenya grew coffee, grew tea under the colonial farms, which Africans themselves were not allowed to grow, by the way. So Africans were to go work in these European farms, produce value for these farms, and yet, they won't reap any of the benefits. These resources, these produce will be shipped to the coast and then on to Europe, on to London, and so on and so forth.
Yes, and they even rewrite the history when talking about global crimes. So I constantly hear the biggest killers in history. And people will say Stalin, they'll say Mao, Hitler, Obviously, they never say King Leopold II. But one name I've never ever heard until I got into the research today is the British. So there was research done about how many excess deaths between 1820 and 1921. The conservative estimates, the very conservative, put it at 50 million. The high estimates put it at 165 million. So we're talking a range probably around 100 million, somewhere in the middle. Yeah. The amount of famines that happened in India. We had the Bengal famine, 2 famines in Bengal, where the second one is where they were exporting food to the UK, not because the UK needed food, but just in case to stockpile them, just in case the war was to escalate, they've got reserves. So taking food away from starving Indians for reserves, just in case one day Britain might need them. And then there's the famous quote by Churchill when he was pleaded with by even other European powers that you've got to give this food back. He said he despises the Indians, they're beastly people with a beastly religion, and it's their own fault for breeding like rabbits. Yeah? So this kind of shows the kind of colonial mentality, how people's lives weren't valued. Then, who it benefited, of course, was Britain. Another interesting statistic that I read was Britain was still benefiting from the stuff that they exported from India 30 years after Indian independence. So India got its independence in around the late 1940s, 1948 I believe it is. 30 years after is 1978. When do we see the British economy start to decline? The great winter of discontent, all of this started to happen when they started reaping the benefits of their former colonies. So what she really means is we benefited greatly for it. Aren't you happy about living in such a developed nation? Stop talking bad about about how bad colonialism was, because if it was so bad, you wouldn't be living a comfortable life that you're living today. That's what she wants to say.
Yeah, and just maybe going back a bit, there was a point that Ahmed mentioned about you don't really need to subjugate someone to share knowledge with them. And Europe's interaction with China, I think, is also another good example. Remember stuff like gunpowder that was invented in China, but the Chinese didn't have to come invade Europe, colonize them for like 500 years for them to be able to teach them how to use gunpowder. But the Europeans, on the other hand, they got the gunpowder and immediately just started embarking on, just properly annihilating every single person they could find.
The Chinese used it for fireworks. They didn't even use it for a weapon. They didn't even use it for a weapon.
And I think that's the thing is when these imperialists come into a place and then weaponize something that the people, indigenous people who are living in those communities were just using for their livelihoods, they somehow think it's a show of some kind of superiority because you've turned it into something that you've weaponized it into, when really it just shows that maybe that's just your nature. You just take things and you can't live without distraction, right? And I think just to go back to what I was hearing when I was listening to all you guys is, there's loads of these black revolutionary leaders have consistently said, we don't need integration, right? We don't need integration. And so when you're talking about life expectancy increasing, we're talking about GDPs increasing, we're talking about education, literacy rates increasing, when the colonialists leave, then it really just proves that point that we do not need integration. And also back to what she was saying, if integration was possible, it would have happened now. So the 43% of people who were still nostalgic about the empire, those are the people in places of power. So you might have the exception who is in the European Union and he's talking about Palestine, or he's talking about this. They don't have the power to do anything, right? So people like her are the people in power, people that think we should thank them, even when they're black people that look like us, like Kemi Badenoch. Those are the people in places of power, and they're not interested. And those like her who are in places of power, she's not exactly in a place of power, but she is vocally as a media personality. But those like her still don't see us as fully human, which is why she has more empathy and thinks a 13-year-old white boy should be taught a false history rather than a true history because, oh my God, how will he feel? But what about a 13-year-old African kid who is not taught their own history? What about that person that looks at the world and sees Britain looking a certain way, sees America, and you've made sure it's in our faces that you're more advanced, you're better, quote unquote, right? So what about that 13-year-old African boy that doesn't know that 80% of their artifacts, of their history, is in your museums? What about the African boy, right?
Yeah, and I thought of one benefit for European colonialism. If we never had European colonialism, that lake in Uganda, what would we call it?
Nameless.
We'd have no name. We'd have no name. No one knew it. People didn't know what to do. They had no name for the lake. Those waterfalls in Zambia. People didn't know what to call them. People didn't know what to call them.
What would we have done?
What would we have done if it wasn't for European colonialism? We'd have had no names for these lakes.
No names for ourselves either.
No names for ourselves. We wouldn't know what to call the capital of Liberia if it wasn't for an American president that went by the name of Monroe. So we really have to thank them for these amazing names. Some of these street names that we still got to this day.
Writing as well. It's not like the Nubians in 200 BC didn't have writing systems.
Thanks to them.
How do they then carry that through life? In terms of who I am as a Brit.
It's not about
I'm not saying we shouldn't say it, but I'm saying that we hear much more of that than we do about the benefits of that period of time.
Well, because I don't think there were benefits. I think that we have to be completely...
So you benefits to us?
I don't think there were.
The benefits to us. Those countries did not, Jonathan, those countries, it absolutely does. Those countries did not have money. They did not have the creativity. They did not have positions of power to do this. No, they didn't.
Countries, they just didn't live like Britain did. It doesn't make it work.
So hold on. If we didn't have money, if we didn't have things, why did you come to us? You don't. A thief doesn't go rob an empty store, does he?
There's the Parenti quote, these places are not poor, they are underexploited. And then reminds me of an interview. Overexploited, sorry. Reminds me of an interview I had with Omali Yeshitela, where his argument actually was that the beginning of colonization was that the Europeans were attempting to find the origin of gold. This was gold in Mali. And since this was so much gold to the extent when Mansa Musa was going on his pilgrimage to Mecca, he actually caused inflation in Egypt because of just giving out too much gold. Now this might piqued Europeans' interest, and Yeshitela's argument is that this is the origin of basically everything that came after. When the Portuguese were going around Africa, they were going around looking for the gold. So going by that point alone, and also considering how wealthy empires like the Songhai and the Mali Empire were, doesn't make sense to say these people had no money. We all know the value of gold, and we all know at some point Mali controlled like 25% of the global gold supply.
But then again, it's also like money is just, I don't know the economic terms, but money is just a thing you give to get a service. So if I give you my shoe and I want your hat, and you want my shoe and I take your hat, that's barter trade. That's still a form of exchange and trading. So I think that their arguments are really very elementary to me. Generally very elementary. And then saying we didn't have creativity. Like, have you looked at the Nubians and their architecture? Before all of this, the Greek used to go to Egypt to study. It's written all over their texts. The Greek mythology that's very much put out there on a pedestal, as if that's the where the all of mythology comes from. They credit it back to Egypt as well. So it's just very crazy to say we didn't have creativity yet. Again, you have all our art in your museum, 80%, but we had no creativity. But you don't want to give it back either.
The Maasai tribe have now had to pattern their prints because people keep stealing it and giving no credit. So how, if you've got no creativity, how can you keep taking out stuff?
That's true.
How can the Louis Vuitton print you can find in Africa? How come all of these things you can find their origin and traces back in Africa. If we had no creativity, it would have come from Norway, wouldn't it? It would have come.
And that's the fair thing, is like many Europeans are paying like thousands of dollars to travel here now to come observe the Maasai culture or what they do. So why are you doing all that if these people really just, don't have a culture, don't have creativity?
Exactly.
I'll let Eric jump in because we don't have time to talk about it today. But also the animals suffered from European colonization. We've done this before.
Yeah.
How many elephants were annihilated through European colonization? We're now down to the last 2 northern white rhinos that are in Opajeta. And they're looked after on a European-owned conservancy. Thank you. Despite the fact that the reason why there's no northern white rhinos left is because of contact with Europeans. So it's like everyone suffered. We had Wangari Maathai have to try protect the green belt because these guys are just chopping down trees, having no respect for nature. We've got a climate crisis because of their greed, chopping down the Amazon rainforest, causing conflict and war in Congo, sending kids into mines, polluting rivers. So the environment suffered, the animals suffered, but most of all, we the people suffered. So it's so disrespectful for to come on here and to say these things. But there's a biblical quote: "Forgive them because they do not know what they've done." Yeah. And I think we had this. Someone mentioned it earlier. She probably does know. I think growing up in the UK, being educated in the UK, I reckon that she doesn't. Because unless you've done further reading, you're not going to get taught it in the classroom. You're not going to get taught it in college. You might get taught it in university if you specialize and request. But even that is a watered down whitewash version.
Yeah. Facts. As in, of course, you have to. They've been denying this thing about our creativity for a very long time. We did a story a while back about how they said the aliens constructed the pyramids. Anything but not African.
The Lalibela churches in Ethiopia. There wasn't one. There was many things that they said were constructed.
So if it's not white people, it's aliens.
Yeah, the Great Walls of Zimbabwe. The Benin Wall.
The Benin Wall.
Everything. The mounts. It was all aliens.
Exactly.
All of the aliens left the rest of the world. They all came to Africa.
Couldn't possibly be African.
But when you look at the history, we've covered a lot of this. All of these ancient civilizations in Africa, from Zimbabwe to Songhai, to Ghana, to all of them across the continent. They all had very advanced systems, not just of administration, security, how they did their
even astrology,
exactly, mathematics. There was something I was saying about from the Moors, that the Roman numbers could not be used to do algebra. You cannot do mathematics with it. That's why the Moors had to take are they the Arabic numbers? Yeah, you can calculate algebra easily using them and not with the Roman numbers. So definitely there's so much that what we had going for us in our civilization. And there's this guy, I forget his name, I think his name is Neil, who said the change of the term Neanderthal, how it, before race theory became a thing, they used to say Neanderthal is, backward, all Africans are Neanderthals. And then later on, when it started becoming clear that Neanderthals are more related to Europeans, then they changed their position again, started saying, oh, they were very creative. These Neanderthals were painting walls and their caves and stuff, because it's now closely related to them. So it's obvious to anyone who sees it. There's no question about it. Anything that is white or proximal to whiteness, they consider good, and we should all be thankful for that. No matter how much we suffered, the lives that were lost, the amount of wealth that was stolen, the amount of history that was erased, all of these things we need to forget and say thank you to the white man. Remove our cap, hold it like
yes, master.
Yes, master, exactly, and say thank you. So there was this European or French archivists who were saying that if they didn't come and take the artifacts from Africa, we did not consider them as art. To us, it was just things which we were doing. Exactly. And we didn't consider them as art. And if they didn't come and loot them from us, they would have disappeared. Instead of some French saying, disappear. So who are you to tell us what our art is to us? We knew that this is sacred. We knew that we want to have this thing for posterity, to put our leaders there, to put our astrology, when you calculate the stars and the planets and stuff. All of this, there was sense to it. There was a design to it. It was never just meant to disappear, like they say. So the creativity, the intelligence, the intellect, I think it's one of the things which Africans have been robbed of. The knowledge that you are intelligent, because you're made to appear stupid, you're made to think of yourself as stupid, and you might start believing the lie that you are indeed stupid. I think that's one of the things which we need to start reclaiming. The African intellect, something which is sorely rubbed over by these guys.
I think just another point on the, you guys have basically mentioned that in as much as they argued there were some good things that came out of it, for every good that was brought by them, there are like 5, maybe 10 negative aspects of it. Take, for example, maybe farming, which created dependency on exports, which is why Kenya now still exports coffee, still exports tea. So you have space, you have land, you have water to grow all this, but you don't have land to grow food for your people, because people in Baringo are still starving, people in Turkana are still starving, but we still send flowers to the UK for some reason. Something like healthcare, if indigenous forms of knowledge are not deliberately subjugated. When the COVID crisis happened, we saw how the rest of the world basically retreated to their corners, and Africa was left alone. Doesn't have a sizable scientific or a medical output to like take care of itself. We saw, or we are seeing the mpox break out in Congo and wherever. I'm not saying that we would have solved these things, but my point is, Africa had systems that were built upon generations and generations. If this pattern was not disrupted, who knows how far the development could have gone. Maybe we wouldn't have gotten the COVID vaccine, but maybe Africa could have had a unified perception or a local institution that actually advances an African agenda, so that when COVID happens, we don't have to put our hands out for like 5-6 months saying, give us vaccines, and when they come in as expired, because there's literally no African at the top, at the helm, who can enforce the African agenda.
Like Britain did, it doesn't make it worse, it just makes it different.
So it's okay to live without education, and it's okay to live without a transportation system, is it?
They did have education. It just wasn't our education system. They had language. It wasn't our language.
It's cultural
medicine we brought to
precisely what we have.
Yes.
I don't know why we're even.
So something that we haven't talked about, she mentions there is language. So that is the big thing that they say. Even so-called progressive lefties in the UK, they'll say, yes, it was bad, but we gave you a unified language. As the Kenyan representatives here, what would your response be to that?
I think, again, they could say it's good in terms of it's connected people, blah, 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 but there's the opportunity cost to that as well. Would you say the same to the Germans? You say the Germans had won World War II, and this
now everyone's speaking German.
Now everyone's speaking German. They're gonna say, yeah, there are some problematic aspects of of the Holocaust, but you guys speak German. You've clearly connected all of you guys. So that's a good thing. No one will literally say that. So I don't know why it's okay for them to say that, Eric.
Incredible. Obviously, we had our own languages. We didn't just pop up in existence and we were tabula rasa, which means there was nothing to us until we had the white culture, language, and history implanted on us. Our history didn't start with colonialism or slavery. We had a very rich history and had our own languages. And even what is unique to Eastern Africa, there's the lingua franca, which is Swahili, which developed outside the expansionism of the Imperial West. So this is something which we still have, and it has connected people. I think over 200 million Africans speak Swahili, and that's just on the continent. When you look at in the diaspora, there's also Swahili speakers. It's being taught in universities. There are people who are getting jobs from it as lecturers to go and teach outside. So we have our own stuff. It's just not what they consider, language or history or money or creativity and all of that. But it's just part of that erasure. which I think they've been really trying to do. We have our language, which unified and connected the whole of Africa. It's now part of the one of the languages of the African Union, not just because it's something which came from the West, but it is something which is innately African. Yeah.
Scenario to your folks.
I think for me, which is it's kind of a sidetracking here, but it's just something I find very interesting is how you're so great and you went all over the world, all over all these countries, and you find people from India or Kenya or Sudan or South Sudan, they speak 1, 2, 3 languages, yet you just speak one, but you're so intelligent. You're the one who brought all this intelligence, all this creativity, all of this to these people, yet that's the sole language you still speak until today. How are you that? Aren't you supposed to be the master?
Yeah.
If I'm the master, I speak 1 language, my student speaks 10.
Who is?
Who is the master?
It's a good point.
Final thoughts?
So there were over 50 colonies. I think there's still 14 overseas territories. And there's that famous saying, the sun never set on the British Empire.
Yeah.
And there's a famous rebuttal to that, because God wouldn't even trust the British in the dark. And I think, okay, they dominated, they did their thing, it built up the Industrial Revolution, cool, that happened, but please stop lying and pretending that it was anything to benefit us. It was clearly done to benefit you. You did very well, you hit the jackpot on the back of our labour. Be appreciative. Don't try.
Thank you.
Say thank you. Don't try gaslight us. Like somehow we both won the lottery. Do you know what I mean? We both win the lottery. You've got the winning ticket. You're still living off those winnings. That's it. Just be humble.
And you're still not happy with that because you still want more.
Exactly. And the nerve. Sorry, the final thing I'll say about this. So this is on GB News, which is the most xenophobic channel, maybe in Europe, but definitely in the UK. The presenter is extremely xenophobic, talking about immigration is changing Britain and changing British way of life. Immigrants are changing British. Immigrants come to work hard and send money back home, and they're detesting and crying about that. You took over our countries for 150 years, 200 years in some cases, and yet you want us to get over it. Well, you get over some immigration, because a lot more immigrants are going to be going to the UK while you still maintain the loot, the Hindi word, of these former colonies. So get used to it. Buckle up, because more of us will be coming. Not me, I'm going the other way, but some of my brothers and sisters will be going to your country.
And also talk about the benefits of immigrants, because that's actually real.
Yeah,
like
facts.
They contribute to your health service.
Facts.
But when it comes to them, no, the benefits.
There was
doesn't
actual
matter.
benefits. Britain, the birth rate in the UK is 1.2. Anyone that knows any basic maths, if it's 1.2, that means it's the declining population. Yeah. You have, I think, over 40% of the population over the age of 50, over 30% over the age of 60. So who's going to take care of all these old people? But anyway, I don't want to talk about the benefits of immigrants, because once they demonize immigrants, once immigrants stop coming, they'll soon realize how beneficial immigration was. So they'll learn the hard way.
Facts.
They'll learn the hard way.
I think this whole thing is part of a coordinated thing to avoid reparations. If they convince us that we got something, we benefited as well. It was like maybe 60-40, 50-50. You guys also got something. So dead this conversation about reparations. So it could be one of those things.
Scenario?
I'm done.
Okay. For me, I think basically this just shows whatever mentality existed in the 1800s, in the 1900s, it still continues today. Because how do you explain to me this, 4 or 5 people on a panel, except the one guy who didn't even get a chance to put his points across. For the rest of them, they're in this bubble. You could think that this is a radio show from the 1950s or something. Nothing has changed. They still consider Africans subhumans, because they won't speak like this about Israel or about Ukraine or about any other white population, but it's reserved specifically for Africans, because they do not see us as they see themselves. They see us as below human. So I don't know if actually there's a way to reconcile that, because we are clearly not the ones who should breach the ground, but a lot of work is to be done if people are to get along nicely.
Yeah, perfect. So let's leave it there. I've been Ahmed Kabela.
William Sakawa.
Scenario.
Gavala.
Peace.
Your viewership means a lot to us. However, about 70% of our viewers have yet to subscribe to our channel. Please help us change those statistics by subscribing, hitting the notification bell, and liking our page to ensure you never miss any episodes.